I didn't even have this as a goal. It never even entered my realm of thinking. And like Kelsey said, I got emotional. I was just like, what? Like, no way. I wasn't even hoping for that. It hadn't even entered my mind. So just to be able to pass that on to you guys, it is a possibility and that it is something you could have in your hopes and dreams.
Hi, welcome to the Family Teams podcast. Our goal here is to help your family become a multi-generational team on mission by providing you with biblically rooted concepts, tools, and rhythms. Your hosts are Jeremy Pryor and Jefferson Bethke, and we can't wait to chat about all things family.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with my lovely daughter, Kelsey Gall, and April Pryor, my wife, and we're going to have a family conversation. How you guys doing today?
Good.
And Kelsey Joy is holding Penelope Joy, who is how old?
She is less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
10 days, probably 11 days. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, well, this is our first granddaughter, and one of the things I think would be really helpful to talk about today is, and one thing's a little unusual, is that April was a part of the birth process. And I wanted to maybe just start and have you, Kelsey, talk about, I know there was like, this was not viewed as normal by those who were attending the birth. So maybe you could tell that story, and then we will back up and we'll talk about kind of the whole process. But I think one of the things that would be really helpful for everyone to like think through, and just as we're processing too as a family, when you're building a multi-generational family, I think that this could and maybe ought to look different, particularly the way that the mother, matriarch, grandmother functions within the family. So we've got 4 daughters. And so April's been really diligently trying to figure out how to do this, because this is going to be a big part of our lives, God willing. So Kelsey, why don't you start and maybe tell that part of the story, and then we'll back up and kind of look at the big picture.
Sure. Mom was at my first birth with Elijah, and the way that came about was Matthew, my husband, and I, we were just talking about who we wanted at the birth. We were taking a birth class. Both births were in the hospital, and I had to tell them who I wanted in the room with me. And so obviously, I wrote his name down, and he was like, is there anyone else that you'd want? And I was like, well, I want my mom there. And he was like, oh, really? And I was like, yeah. I feel like I didn't think too much about it. And then I asked Mom, and I feel like you got emotional, but I was just asking. And I didn't really think that was like a huge deal. I was just like, well, you're my mom. So yeah. And so she was there for the whole 30-hour, super long induction process. And that story is very different than this story. But then when I got pregnant again, I asked Matthew, I was like, are you okay if my mom comes again? He was like, yeah, that was great. So we just asked her again, and honestly didn't think too deeply about it. But I feel like the two of us had learned and talked a lot about, after Elijah's birth and during my pregnancy with Penny, about what birth's supposed to look like, and historically what it was like and what it's turned into now and things like that. So it was just kind of like an ongoing conversation between Mom and I feel like the whole pregnancy. And part of that, what came out of it, was her wanting to take a doula course. And I remember when you told me that you signed up for a doula course, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Because I had kind of been going back and forth about everyone said you should have a doula if you're going to the hospital, because they can help advocate for you and all these things. But they're expensive, and they're not usually covered by any type of insurance or whatever. And so I was like, I don't know if I can hire one. And we kind of interviewed one last time and didn't really click with her. And so I was just kind of intimidated by the whole interviewing process. We want a stranger there. I don't know. And so when you told me that you wanted to take a doula course, I was like, that makes so much more sense, because odds are you'll probably be at more births, at least more of mine, and then maybe some of the other sisters and stuff. We'll see. But I got really excited about that. And then you took the course, and we're talking about it the whole time and really into it. And a lot of it was this bag of tricks that you bring along with you and things like that. And so if fast forward to the actual hospital, we had this nurse. Her name was Jody. Shout out to Jody at St. And she was awesome. I really liked her in labor and delivery, and, somewhere in the after Penny was born in, like, the golden hour time where they're letting the baby just sit on mom's chest for a little bit, Jody was there going over, like, some paperwork and stuff, and she said, sh there was some comment about how long I was in labor for, and I was like, "Well, it was, like, active labor for probably, like, 10 hours, but I've had, like, 4 days of, like, what I would call pre-labor, like, kept thinking it was gonna start and then it would go away and all that kinda stuff, and I just kind of gestured over to mom, and I was like, "Well, I mean, she labored for 5 days with me, so, I kinda," it was like payback, like making a joke or something, and she kinda looked between the 2 of us and was like, "Wait, you're her you're the mom?" And we were like, "Yeah, yeah," and she's like, "Yeah, I'm the grandma, I'm the mom." And the nurse was like, "Wait, I thought you were the doula. Are you the doula?" And she'd be like, "Yeah, well, she's kind of both," like, trying to explain. And she was so shocked, and she just kept looking back and forth between the 2 of us like, "What? Wait, you're the what?" And, like, during the whole, like, labor time, she never picked up on the fact that you were my mom. And what the comment that she made was, "You have such good boundaries." And she kinda talked about how, like, usually when the mom's in the room, the nurse has to, like the mom is like a whole person that she needs to, like, manage and take care of and make sure she's, like, kept busy and not freaking out and whatever, and, she didn't have to do that this time and thought that mom was actually really helpful, and so I think she was just really surprised by that, and so we just came away from that kind of processing like, "Oh, like, if a daughter felt comfortable enough to ask her mom to come with her, it still might not be a positive experience, um, during the labor process." And so, I don't know, we've just been kind of processing that a little bit since
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, having a nurse that maybe has seen hundreds of these and never seen anything like this, and I'm sure people listening to this are like, "I would never want my mom. She's the last person I'd want while I'm actually, in active labor."
Yeah.
And that's really unfortunate, it seems like. It seems like there is something natural about this connection as opposed to, like, really unusual, but it is unusual, like, in our culture.
The Family Plan Calendar is the new way to keep your family team organized. Plan your rhythms, menu, household chores, and notes for the family all in one place. Visit familyteams.com to purchase.
Yeah, I'd love, April, for you to reflect on what do you think? Yeah, tell us kind of like what brought you to want to do this, and how have you thought about this kind of from the big picture perspective
Mhm.
about a mother, matriarch and her daughter.
Well, I think it was interesting that the way the nurse worded it saying, "You have such good boundaries. You have such good boundaries." She couldn't believe my boundaries, and I, was kind of like, "I okay." After and she even said something like, "You 2 must get along really well, or you must have a good relationship," or something like that, and, so I just was reflecting on that a lot, in the days hence, and I think that what she was labeling good boundaries, I would call, like, an understanding of roles,
Yeah.
and I know that we've tried to throw that out, the idea of roles in a lot of modern society. But I think that I believe very strongly that my son-in-law is the head of Kelsey now, and that this birthing process is for them to experience together. And that although it's a massive privilege for me to get to be a part of it, it's not about me. And so I am there to help Kelsey and support her, um, much as I have throughout her whole life. Since I was pregnant with her, it's been my goal to help Kelsey succeed and do things well. And in that context, I felt like I understood what my role was. I was mother to the birthing woman. And so and then I think my understanding of what that role was very much a support role and what needs to be done. And, it's about her, not about me. and it's about getting this baby into this world safely. And it's about how can I not get in the way of Kelsey and Matt's relationship during this process. But also, it's kind of bonding between him and I as well, because we're working together to get this massive job accomplished
Yeah.
of supporting Kelsey in the time of her most vulnerable time
Yeah.
in her life is when she's in labor. And how can I step into that role of making sure she's okay? So it doesn't matter if I'm uncomfortable holding my body in a position to, reach around to her back and make sure that I'm rubbing that one spot she wants in her back while Matt's doing this thing over here. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm getting wet in the shower or those things. It's like, what is happening to Kelsey? What does she need? What position is she in? All those things. Um, it just comes from like the instant Kelsey was born. It's like, what does she need? How do I take care of her? How do I make that happen? And when she said, "You guys must get along really well or have a good relationship or something," I was also reflecting on that, and I was like, "Well, that's hard won. That's a hard we fought for our relationship, and we worked really hard through the years to, um, overcome any hurdles that were in the way of us having, um, a good relationship." And so I feel like, to me, getting to be in a birth of a daughter is like a huge, um, fruit of years of hard work,
Yeah.
relationally and self-sacrifice along the way. It was a huge, like,
Yes.
uh, epic experience to get to be a part of.
Yeah. And so many people, I think that, we're trying to speak to are probably young moms, maybe with you, you maybe listen to this and have a daughter or young daughters, or you're looking forward to maybe someday having daughters-in-law. You're going to be faced with this opportunity. And I think that there, this is a huge epiphany. The kind of what culture calls boundaries needs to exist because we decided to throw out roles. I think that was
Mhm.
the big epiphany that we're all kind of realizing. So boundaries is on the rise as a conversation. And it does make sense that if every single person is just an individual and everyone's needs are sort of equal and everyone should just fight for their own needs to be met, then you do become a fairly unsafe person if you bring that kind of spirit into the delivery room. Like, a nurse knows why she's there, right? She's not there to get her needs. She's being paid a salary in order for her to serve the people that she's serving in the hospital, right? The doctors, all the people, they know their role. But in the family, we decided, let's just destroy all roles and just like pretend like we're just individuals. And that is devastating when it comes to when you actually are trying to function like a family. And what we're trying to articulate or trying to understand is that, like, in the same way that when you're a team and, you wouldn't say if you're, playing some kind of sports team that the quarterback has such good boundaries. He didn't, he threw the ball instead of like, ran for a catch. Like, that's not boundaries, right? He understands the difference between his role and, the wide receiver or whatever, right? So in the family, there are these roles. And so because we've now not only decided to get rid of them, but now generations are being raised having never even seen these roles before. And
Mhm.
if it comes up, they're immediately stamped as like, oh, that's regressive, that's traditional, that somehow puts people into some kind of like unfree, restrictive world, as opposed to the freedom that you guys got to experience and being able to be in the hospital room and have this incredible experience together because you actually understood the roles. So yeah, I think that's a big paradigm shift. So Kels, what are your thoughts about that transition or that like?
Yeah, well, I'll say that, like, so the things that she did both of my births were, like, if one thing needed to be done, it was, like, went straight to Matthew, and then if two things needed to be done, then, like, mom would do the second thing, is what I would say.
Mhm.
Uh, but, like, this time I went into labor on my own, and so I was laboring at home, and so it was in the middle of the night, so it's just Matthew and I for a majority of that part. And then but mom was, like, awake and, like, probably really anxious, like, "Is this actually happening now?" Um, And so I texted her when my contractions got close enough together. I was like, okay, I think it's time for you to come. And then her and Matthew like kind of took turns being with me during my contractions and like finishing packing the hospital bag or loading up the car or whatever. And then we had talked about ahead of time that mom would drive so that Matthew, she could drop the two of us off at the door and he could be the one going in with me. And in the car ride, he's like timing my contractions and everything. So I feel like if there was like a role that was closer relationally, like being the one to walk in the hospital and go into triage, like that kind of thing, that automatically went to Matthew. So do you feel like if I had been giving birth like 10 years ago, do you feel like you would have been the same way in the delivery room? Or do you feel like there's something in the raising of teens and adults, like somewhere in that transition that um that part of your role kind of got realized? Because I feel like that the teen to adult transition has been a big um learning curve, I guess. Do you feel like that was part of it, or do you feel like that it's more of like a personality thing that you would have done either way?
I feel like uh it has been a progression. Like definitely the 10-year ago me, I don't think I would have. Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It I feel like it's just part of the progression of life, like the stages of motherhood. It just makes sense that this is the order that it would come in and that I'd have to go through these things in order to be here and these things in order to be here. And I think a lot of the term like capacity, I talk about this a lot with like your capacity grows yeah, with each passing season. Then you're able to tackle more things. And I feel like this is just a natural progression because you've let it be natural. I've let it be natural. The Lord has guided us this way. That it does seem like a natural progression. And the 10-year ago me wouldn't have known how or what or, just wasn't ready or wouldn't have had the training even just like in my mothering.
Yeah,
So
that's
like a
good.
question.
Yeah. Well, and I think, one of the things I picture a mom who might be listening to this is thinking, oh, okay, I would love to have that experience with my daughter someday. I want to be the kind of person who could be in the delivery room when she's at her most vulnerable and in a lot of pain, to know that she could trust me. And so I like what you're saying, Kelsey. Like a lot of that maturity comes through parenting teens. I think there's a lot to be said about that. But yeah, I'm curious, April, if there's anything else you would add to that too. Just like if you were giving a tutorial to a mom who wants to have this experience, what are some things you would encourage them to think about or to believe or to do to get ready for this?
Yeah. I would say in the younger years, meaning when your daughter is like, 0 to 10 or 0 to 12 or something like that, that you're, talking about motherhood in a very positive light, that it's a gift to be able to raise a next generation, to be talking about birth stories in a positive light instead of like a traumatized, terrified way. So it's something that your daughters are looking forward to and know that it wasn't like, um, it was something that you experienced yourself and that you hope that someday they get to experience. So a lot of time, I feel like at the beginning part of their life, just talking about actual birth and babies and all that is like in a positive light, motherhood, how much I love being a mom, all that stuff is important. And then I feel in the teen years, you don't necessarily even need to talk about those things, but you're working so hard on just your relationship. And I feel like one way I grew a ton in the teen years when my kids were teens, and I still have a couple, but is learning how to back off, learning when to keep my mouth shut, how to control my reactions to things, um, how to knowing that I have trained them in this way, and if their actions or their behavior doesn't necessarily match their training, not going into despair
just allowing space and time to happen for them to explore things, their life, their reactions, their beliefs, their everything from like what they want to wear to how they're going to drive a car to how they're going to treat those in authority, like all of the things where they start to get a little more freedom. And as you watch how they grow and develop, giving them time and space to experience things and being able to circle back around. And it makes you more of a safe person if you're not just going to be like jumping on every single thing. And I think as moms, we potentially have so much fear for our kids. Like we fear for their safety. We fear they're going to make a bad decision or they're going to make a mistake they're going to regret for the rest of their lives. And so there can be all this fear that controls us, but learning how to trust the Lord with them still. It's like, the peeling of the hands and the opening it up and just saying, okay, God, you see this, you see it, you know what's going on. You're pursuing them. You have a relationship with them. I have to trust the Lord that He is pursuing my child in such a way that they will hopefully meet each other on the path and my child will fall in love with the Lord. That's my hope and prayer for them. And so along that journey, as I'm stepping back and giving them space, I'm learning how to control myself and with the Lord's help of not controlling or domineering or guilt tripping, all those things that are huge temptations for me, to back off, watch. And then I think the marriage process is part of that too, like watching your child meet their spouse, fall in love, not knowing if it's their spouse or not, and then them making the decision and then the wedding planning and then them actually getting married and like living the newlywed life. You learn a lot in that stage too.
Yeah.
Of trusting the Lord with your kid's future, with their spouse, kind of taking that place in their life. And then believing in my heart that this is a good design. And so if I actually believe it, my actions better match it. So I've had to learn a lot about that. So it comes in stages. But those are from my very limited perspective, because Kelsey's only been married 2.5 years. So I've only known it for this long. But what I have known would be those things. I've only attended 2 births of hers. So we'll see if that's something my other daughters want. But if you kind of project yourself into the future, like, oh, if I want her to trust me and want me around in that scenario, I better not try to pull the wool over her eyes in this decision, or not trying to coerce her or, manipulate her into what I want her to do now. I want her to understand that I'm going to want what's best for her. Let her see both sides of the coin when she's decision making and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that one of the things that's been really encouraging to me about long-term family relationships is the skill of repair as opposed to perfection. You don't have to treat each other perfectly. You need to love each other. You have to be good at repairing relationships if they're strained, and become that person who's increasingly safe to be around, and the feeling that, oh, this, like, we've been through hard things, and we know how to get through hard things. Who else would you want on your team, right? To go through a really challenging thing like a birth. Awesome. I don't know, Kelsey, if you're a good spot to chime in before we close up, see if there's any last things you wanted to say about the topic, about either being about somebody who's thinking about like having their mom maybe come and be a part of this, or somebody who wants to get to a place where this might be a possible role they could participate in the future.
Yeah, I would say that the vulnerability you feel during birth is definitely to the degree that I don't know that I would push to have your mom there if she isn't that safe person for you already. But making that a goal in raising your daughter, I think, is super worthwhile. So it's kind of that, like, just that long-term mindset that, you might take 20 plus years before you see if that paid off and if she's going to want you there for one reason or another. Um, and, but I think it's like, it's a helpful lens to view your relationship with her in. I think the, person she's going to want there in her most vulnerable time, or is this going to make me like a threat to some, like, either not make her relaxed, like, because some moms don't feel like a threat, they're just a stressful presence, and that's not something that you want to take into the birth with you for physical reasons as well as emotional reasons. So I think even just being able to like have fun together and have those conversations with one another and especially in like the teen to adult years, that transition being more of like a friend transition, I feel like has been helpful to where like mom maybe is supposed to be parenting me less and less, but that doesn't mean that we're interacting less or that, oh, now that we can't, um, now that we're not really interacting in the capacity we were, we don't really know how to behave around each other. It's like, well, now we find fun things that we can do together or productive things we can do together, and kind of mature the nature of the relationship to the point where like, you're still my mom in terms of, like, that comforter and the, like, um, you know, someone that you might go to for advice and things like that, but you're also, like, a companion as well, where you wouldn't be that way to, like, your 8-year-old daughter, like, you're supposed to be more of, like, the authority, and maybe you still do fun things together, but that's a companion, it's not, like, your primary, nature of your relationship. So I feel like that's been helpful too in the past, I don't know, 6+ years is us like moving more into that capacity, to where we want to share meaningful experiences like that with each other as well.
Need a blueprint to revise your family to be a multi-generational team on mission? The book, Family Revision by Jeremy Pryor, is the book that summarizes all the big picture ideas you hear on this podcast. Available on Amazon or familyteams.com.
Well, it's so good. And this is kind of what we want to encourage you guys as you think about building a family team. Like Kelsey's saying, this isn't something that ends at 18. It's just getting started. But it looks very different, when your kids are adults. And part of it is just wanting to prepare you guys for inhabiting and practicing the kinds of roles that will make this part of your life so meaningful for everyone, for your adult children, for your grandchildren. And we are very much like in the early stages of trying to learn this. But I think because this is such an ancient way, it's not easy to figure this out. So we want to be kind of in real time, being processing like what we're learning with a lot of y'all who are kind of on this journey, maybe a few steps behind us in terms of your age or the age of your kids. But we want to like try to figure out, okay, here's some things we're learning here's a direction that seems really healthy.
And I just want to say too, I didn't even have this as a goal. I did not even think it never even entered my realm of thinking about, oh, I hope to be in my daughter's births with them. I hoped my daughters had children and then I got to help with the babies and things like that. But being asked to be part of the birth was actually quite a surprise to me. And like Kelsey said, I got emotional. I was just like, what? Like, no way. This is, when I processed it more and more later, I just remember thinking like, this is beyond what I even hoped. I wasn't even hoping for that. It hadn't even entered my mind. So just to be able to pass that on to you guys, it is a possibility and that it is something you could kind of like have in your hopes and dreams.
Right.
It's
And
cool.
and I think
Yeah.
I think in ancient cultures, the women of the family would rally around the vulnerable, member of the family who's in the middle of delivery, and that would have been normal in certain times where I think the family roles were a lot clearer. And now that we primarily function as individuals, this is a lot more confusing. And
Yeah.
and so we're trying to I think what we're doing is sometimes, like you're saying, April, we don't even know what is normal in those roles until we lean into them and then suddenly notice that something ancient is getting revived. And this is
Yeah.
one of those things that I'm like, oh, this actually probably it should be normal, but it's incredibly unusual. Let's understand why it's so unusual and if
Yeah.
there is a pathway possibly to this ancient way of being a family, being a multi-generational family. And I think it's really cool. Yeah, just getting to explore this. And I love how you said, look, I think it's important to always not hold expectations over your adult kids. Like let them decide, what is healthy. And Kelsey, you said it really well. Like It's just like, this shouldn't, you need to be kind of only inviting somebody in who is like, you're in a position where you should not be operating based on guilt, or obligation in the most vulnerable moments when you're in this kind of pain and trying to endure this kind of thing. The question really needs to be very much on the mother. Like, what do you need? What would help you the most right now? But to be the kind of person who, would be really helpful, like that's pretty epic. So awesome. Well, so good to get to process this. I thought that was a really interesting kind of discovery that we're just kind of working through as a family, and love to have that. And so April, you took, maybe just to button up, you took a doula course. Maybe just explain why you did that, and yeah, what that was about. And would you recommend that for somebody who's maybe, thinking about moving this direction?
Yeah, well, I had been a part of 3 births, a friend, a sister, and then Kelsey's first, and which which was fascinating to me. Like, all of them were very interesting and fascinating. And I had my own 5 birth experiences, and so they were all of them very different, and for their own uniquenesses of different situations and different, things that were happening in the births themselves. And so I was pretty curious about, the world, the birth world anyway. And then when Kelsey asked me a second time to be at her second birth, I thought, okay, I'd like to get a little more educated on this. I know it's a rabbit hole you can go way down, and there's lots of like different philosophies. There's a lot of different, you know, tones, I guess you could say, that people take. And I just wanted to kind of get an understanding of what was out there in terms of uh, belief systems, or like, how people do it. I'm more on like the natural side of things. And so I wanted to experience or like learn more about that. So that is why I took a course. And in the course, they say that when I'm done with the course, I can say I'm a doula. But of course, I feel like I need to get a little more experience before I actually say that. And I'm not doing it to like get a job or earn money doing it. But I think it was incredibly informative, very interesting to hear my teacher's stories, that she had been through, just hear the different stories. I'm in my own little world is filled with women having babies all the time. And so just knowing little ways I can support them or help them, um, when they're before they have the baby, and then like right after, like postpartum, as to like what kinds of things are helpful. So that those I feel like that's part of me. Again, this journey is just taking me on this like it's not something I've always wanted to do or I've always thought would be really cool or anything like that. It's like this is the next thing. And Kelsey just asked me to be at the second birth. I would like to learn more about this so I feel better prepared and more competent. And so I do have my little bag of tricks, little things. And for me, it was also like, so I can help Matthew with his part in the, like, maybe have ideas for him if things are stalling out or whatever. And so Kelsey did have a good amount of days of what we're calling pre-labor because we weren't sure quite exactly what to call it. And I feel like taking the doula course really helped equip me to help her in those days, because it wasn't like, "Matt, come home from work now," and, like,
Yeah.
it's happening. It was, like, very, subtle things that were happening, and so we were just I felt like that was a privilege. Myself, my other daughters, Kelsey's sisters, we were all kind of, like, working together to, like, watch Elijah and help Kelsey and have her drink this and try that position, and, "Okay, now let's do this and that," and so that was a very it was a time full of question marks, but it was also a time where we were able to kind of work together, and Kelsey was very determined, and her energy ebbed and flowed, and we were trying to be there to
Yeah.
support her during that time. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, one of the things that may be a little unusual for people is that, we in our family, just theologically, we just believe kids, we want to have kids early and often. And most people are either negative about having kids, like only have them when, all the stars align and you can afford everything and everything's perfect, or They're very neutral about having kids. Like, well, it just depends on so many circumstances, and so many times it's negative, many times positive. And we just have an unambiguous positive, um, like value for children. And when you have that disposition and believe that that comes from the scriptures, the command to be fruitful, multiply, the declaration that children are a gift from the Lord, then, and that this is just a natural part of the way that God designed his good design for the world and for family, then of course, yeah, like to your point, April, a lot of this is we need to work as a family multi-generationally to make this accessible, to make this possible, to make this sustainable for the next generation. Otherwise, of course, they should, throttle down the number of kids or the frequency. That can really be damaging to a young family. But this is not the way that we were designed to live. We were designed to live with the support of an extended family. And well, what does that look like? Well, it looks like a lot of things during that kind of pre-labor, in labor, post-labor, world. So, anything else you'd want to say, Kelsey, about that before we go?
No, I think you're spot on. It was so helpful to have support in those days where it's not intense enough that my husband should stay home from work, but I also don't really want to be alone and I'm uncomfortable taking care of my toddler all day. And so it was so much help to have all of that support those days leading up to it. And I'm so thankful.
Awesome. Sweet. Well, I'm really proud of both of you guys. This was such a cool experience that you were able to do together, and yeah, I'm excited to see this become possibly more normal for families that really lean into these roles in a really healthy way. So, all right. So thanks for joining me, and thank you all for listening today.
Thank you for listening to the Family Teams podcast. If you're enjoying this content or have learned something new, please make sure to leave a rating and review and share with a friend. To stay up to date with our events, new content, and products, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram @Family Teams.